They said it was a violation. She said it was the right thing to do. The man had a scar that ran from his temple to his jar. His dog wore a red vest that read, "Service animal, do not pet." And when she handed him his coffee, she did it without hesitation. Her boss didn't yell, he didn't argue. He just pointed at the door and said 5 cold words. "You're done here, Grace." But what none of them knew was that someone had recorded the entire thing. And by the time the morning rush ended, the parking lot outside the cafe was rumbling. 4 military Humvees rolled in, and with them came a reckoning. Welcome to the Storyscape, where forgotten heroes finally get their voice. Before we begin, let us know which city you're watching from. And if you believe this story deserves to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us keep their memory alive. Grace Donnelly had brewed the same coffee blend every Wednesday morning for the past 6 years. Bold, dark roast, nothing fancy, just the kind that kept your eyes open and your memories close. She stood behind the counter of the Mason Lug Café in Mason, Georgia, wearing her usual navy apron, sleeves rolled, hair pinned, and her gold wedding ring strung on a chain around her neck. The cafe wasn't much from the outside, a single-story brick building tucked between a hardware store and a bait shop. But for those who knew, it wasn't just a place to get coffee, it was sanctuary. She always came in early on Wednesdays. It was Hero's Hour, 9 a.m. sharp. A tradition that started with 3 veterans, her father-in-law Ben, a Vietnam vet named Ralph who barely spoke, and Louisa, a former Army nurse with hands that trembled only when they weren't holding coffee. Over time, the circle grew. Afghanistan, Iraq, Desert Storm, new faces, older wounds. Some came to speak, others just to sit in silence and sip. Grace never asked questions. She just remembered. Which mug belonged to whom? Who drank decaf because of medication? Who brought their service animal? Who hadn't smiled since the anniversary of a battle no one else remembered? She kept a worn leather notebook under the counter filled with notes like, "Ray likes corner seat, don't play jazz on Tuesdays, Ralph flinches at loud doors." That morning, the air smelled like rain and old hope. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in soft amber strips. The bell above the door jingled in familiar rhythm. Regulars came in, nods instead of greetings, shoulders easing with the first sip. Grace smiled at each one, quietly refilling cups like she was pouring something heavier than caffeine. Then the door opened again, a different sound, a crisp, hurried whoosh of authority. Logan Prescott stepped in like he owned the space. Dark blazer, clipboard, hair perfectly combed into a rigid part. His name tag read State Health Inspector. Grace blinked, caught off guard. She wasn't expecting a visit, certainly not on Hero's Hour. "Can I help you find something?" she asked with her usual warmth. "An unannounced inspection," he said flatly, already scanning the room like a hawk looking for a wounded mouse. He moved with clinical detachment, tapping surfaces, opening fridge doors, frowning at labels. The cafe quieted, the regulars watching from behind coffee mugs. Then he saw Shadow. The dog lay silently beneath the far-right table beside Ray McMillan, ex-Marine, recon, never stayed long, never said much. Shadow wore a red vest that clearly read, "Service dog, do not pet." Prescott stopped like he'd hit a wall. His eyes narrowed. "That animal," he said sharply, "is in violation of state health code." The cafe went still. Grace stepped out from behind the counter slowly, heart already thudding. "He's a registered service dog. He's permitted under ADA law. I don't care what the vest says. Dander, hair, saliva. This is a food environment. He has to go." Ray's shoulders tightened. His knuckles whitened around the ceramic cup. Shadow didn't move, just looked up at his handler with the quiet patience of a dog who knew when to wait. Grace took a slow breath. Everyone was watching. She could feel Luisa's gaze, hear the silence pressing in. She could have said nothing, could have apologized and asked Ray to step outside. But something in her, maybe years of serving others, maybe Michael's photo hanging behind the register, said no. I'm not asking a veteran to leave, and I'm not asking his service dog to leave either. You're violating compliance, he said through clenched teeth. Grace nodded. Write your report. From the back of the room, someone murmured, "Damn right." But that was when everything shifted, because someone else had just walked in. Not a customer, not a regular. Deborah Lyle, regional manager, corporate. She'd arrived early, and she'd seen everything. She didn't raise her voice, didn't shout. She just said, "Grace Donnelly, you've just violated policy. Pack your things, you're terminated." The cafe gasped. A spoon clattered to the floor. Grace didn't flinch. She looked at Ray, then at the wall where Michael's photo still hung. She untied her apron with shaking hands, placed it gently on the counter, turned to Lena, the young barista behind her, and said quietly, "Make sure Ray gets his refill." Then she walked out the side door into the Georgia morning. Nobody followed, not yet, but someone, without meaning to, had started recording, and somewhere in the digital winds of a wired world, a story began to take shape. A quiet act of defiance, a woman who wouldn't back down, a moment that would ripple through military bases, small towns, and the heart of a nation. And in 27 minutes, 4 Humvees would roll down Main Street. 27 minutes. That's how long the Mason Mug Café sat in silence after Grace walked out. No one moved. No one sipped their coffee. No one dared speak louder than a whisper. The clink of a spoon against porcelain sounded like thunder. Lena, the youngest barista behind the counter, barely 22 and still learning how to perfect a latte swirl, stood frozen behind the counter. Her hands trembled as she reached for Ray McMillan's empty cup. "You want a refill?" she asked gently. Ray didn't answer at first, then nodded once. "Thank you." The words sounded heavier than they should have, like a veteran offering a salute. Outside, the Georgia morning continued like nothing had happened. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, cars rolled by, unaware that a line had been drawn in the heart of town. But inside the cafe, the emotional air was thick, humid with shame and disbelief. Prescott, the health inspector, tried to act unfazed. Clipboard still in hand, he made a show of checking the temperature log taped to the fridge. But everyone could see it, the stiffness in his posture, the way his eyes kept flicking to the door like he expected a reckoning. And then they heard it. Low at first, a deep mechanical hum rolling in from the east, like distant thunder. The windows trembled, cups vibrated on saucers. "What the hell is that?" someone whispered. From the far end of Main Street, through the light fog that hadn't yet burned off, came the unmistakable silhouettes of military vehicles. Not one, not two, 4. 4 Marine Humvees moving in formation. Matte green, tires thick with red Georgia dust, antennas upright, lights off, engines growling like beasts kept just barely in control. They didn't stop for lights. They didn't hesitate at corners. The cafe's patrons rose to their feet, pressing against the windows. Lena moved closer to Ray's table. Even Shadow, the service dog, shifted upright, not anxious, just alert, waiting. The vehicles pulled into the small lot with slow, deliberate purpose. No screeching, no chaos, just power, authority. resolve. Doors opened in near unison, and out stepped 24 Marines in full dress blues. Polished shoes, white gloves, medals flashing against stiff navy coats. Their movements were exact, quiet, the kind that didn't need to raise a voice to command a room. Behind them, from the lead Humvee, came a single figure. Colonel Richard Gaines, decorated, composed, commanding. His ribbons stretched across his chest like a tapestry of wars survived. He wore no sunglasses. He didn't need them. His eyes had stared into too many fire zones to flinch at morning light. Inside the cafe, Prescott stepped back. Lena's mouth fell open. Is that? Ray stood, slowly, like his joints had to remember how to rise. He didn't say anything. He didn't salute, just nodded. Colonel Gaines entered alone. The cafe bell jingled softly behind him. The silence that followed was absolute. He didn't look around, didn't scan the menu, didn't demand attention. He already had it. He stopped in the center of the cafe, turned to Lena. "Is Grace Donnelly here?" Lena swallowed. "No, sir. She was fired for standing up for Mr. McMillan and his dog." The colonel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "She served this town and the people who defend it with more honor than most officials I've met in D.C. He turned to Ray. The two men locked eyes. Ray said nothing, but he didn't have to. The colonel nodded once, then turned back to Lena. "I need you to do something." "Anything," she said. He gestured toward the chalkboard sign, the one that had been changed earlier by corporate. "Erase that," he said, "and write this instead." Lena nodded quickly, already grabbing the eraser. Outside, two Marines stepped behind the counter. With practiced care, they unfastened the corporate logo panel from the back wall. They folded it slowly, with the reverence of handling a flag. And then one of them hung a new sign in its place. Wood, hand-painted in clean, proud lettering. "Welcome to Grace's house, where honor is served daily." Prescott stuttered forward. "This is a violation of—" Colonel Gaines turned his gaze toward him. Quiet, firm. "You don't need a rank or title to treat people with basic dignity." Prescott took a step back. Deborah Lyle, the regional manager, stood in the corner, pale, silent, completely disarmed. "Miss Lyle," Colonel Gaines said without looking at her, "you made your decision. Now we've made ours." He stepped outside again, lifted his phone, and made one call. Less than a minute later, Lena's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, confused, then gasped. "It's a message from Fort Granger," she said aloud. "They want Grace to report to base headquarters today." Inside the cafe, Ray slowly sat back down. Shadow curled up at his feet again, eyes closing like the storm had passed. But outside, the real change had only just begun. Grace Donnelly hadn't cried in years. Not when her husband's belongings arrived home in a plain government box. Not when the Mason Mugg's rent nearly doubled overnight. Not even when her father-in-law, the man who once called her the moral compass of this town, passed away in his sleep. But as she sat alone in her truck, parked in her gravel driveway that Wednesday afternoon, something broke loose. Not a sob, not a collapse, just one tear, and then another. The message had come just 15 minutes earlier, forwarded by Lena from her phone at the cafe. It was from Fort Granger, official, sealed, immediate. "Grace Donnelly is requested at base headquarters By direct order of Colonel Richard Gaines. She read it twice, then a third time, trying to decide if it was real. Her cafe uniform still clung to her, stained apron tucked in the passenger seat, hair still pinned, wrists still trembling from the confrontation. She had been fired, humiliated, pushed out like she never mattered. Now they were calling her to base. She didn't know if it was a courtesy or something more. With a shaky breath, Grace turned the ignition. The old truck rumbled to life, and she made the familiar drive, past the oak trees that had shaded her marriage, past the grocery store where she bought creamer for veterans who couldn't handle bitterness, not even when the holes always flew half-mast for someone's father. She reached the main gates of Fort Granger, rolled down her window, and handed over her ID. The young Marine at the checkpoint glanced at it, then looked up in surprise. "One moment, ma'am." A brief exchange on his radio, then a crisp nod. "You're cleared through. Colonel Gaines will meet you personally." She swallowed hard. Inside the base, the world was its own universe. Perfectly spaced sidewalks, sharp salutes, formations of men and women running in cadence. She had been here before, years ago, as a military wife, always waiting, always supporting, always just outside the chain of command. Now, she didn't know where she stood. Colonel Gaines was waiting at the main administration building. No dress blues this time, just a tan short-sleeve uniform and a gaze that cut through formality. "Grace," he said simply, offering a hand. She shook it. "Thank you for coming. Wasn't sure if I had a choice." He smiled, just barely. "Walk with me." He led her down a long corridor, past photos of commanders, service medals under glass, and campaign flags worn at the edges. They stopped in front of a door marked Veteran Transition and Wellness Initiative. "I want you to show you something," he said. Inside, the space was still being assembled. Folding chairs stacked against walls, whiteboards scribbled with tentative ideas, bins of supplies, therapy mats, group manuals, water bottles with Marine Corps logos, and people. Not soldiers, veterans. One man in his 50s adjusting the blinds, a young woman in long sleeves pushing a therapy dog through a maze of cones, volunteers arranging notebooks in neat piles, the kind of quiet hum that said something real was building. "This is a pilot program," Gaines explained. "We've had it on the books for 2 years. No traction, too sterile, too top-down." He paused, looked at her. "You, on the other hand, built something powerful without even trying." Grace folded her arms, unsure. "I'm not a social worker. I'm not a doctor. I just ran a cafe." "No," he said, stepping closer. "You ran a sanctuary." He gestured toward a stack of veteran surveys on a nearby table. "Do you know what every single one of them says? Where do you feel safe?" And over, handwritten, unprompted, your name, your cafe, your kindness. She didn't know what to say. "You made that cafe sacred ground, Grace, not because of coffee, because of connection." Just then, the young woman with the service dog approached slowly. Her name tag read Tiffany Rios. She hesitated, then smiled shyly. "Hi, sorry, I just wanted to say, I saw the video." Grace blinked. Tiffany continued, "I haven't stepped into a coffee shop since I came home. Too much noise, too many looks. But if you ran a place like this, I think I could try." The colonel waited, then nodded toward a folder on a nearby desk. "Grace, we'd like you to lead this center, not as a face, not as a favor, as the director." Grace looked at the room, at Tiffany, at the volunteers, at the wall where photos were already going up. A wall where pain wasn't erased, but honored. She felt the gravity of it, the trust, the responsibility.
And then she nodded once. "I'll do it." Colonel Gaines smiled. "Good, because this isn't just a program. It's a promise." And as Grace Donnelly stepped forward, deeper into the heart of Fort Granger's new mission, something became clear. This wasn't a comeback. It was a continuation. It started without ceremony. No grand ribbon cutting, no polished speeches or camera crews. Just Grace Donnelly standing alone at dawn, a ring of keys in her hand and a notebook tucked under her arm, unlocking the door to a modest building that now bore a new sign: Veteran Transition and Wellness Center, Director Grace Donnelly. For a full minute, she didn't move, just stood there in the quiet of the morning, letting it sink in. Then she exhaled, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The center wasn't much, not yet. The paint was still drying in the community room, the coffee machine needed descaling, and the donated recliners didn't match. But it felt right. Not because it was polished, but because it was real. She began with what she knew: coffee and consistency. A fresh pot brewed every morning. Real mugs, not paper. Notes scribbled on a whiteboard. Who needs a ride? Wednesday, dog therapy. Tiffany's birthday Friday. Keep it quiet. She didn't make it feel like a clinic. She made it feel like home. Veterans trickled in at first, one or two a day, then a few more. Some were familiar faces from the Mason mug, some were strangers with nervous shoulders and hard eyes. But something shifted the moment they crossed the threshold. There were no intake forms, no clipboard shoved into calloused hands, just Grace at a small welcome desk, a tired but steady smile, and the same words every time. Coffee's on the left, quiet's on the right. Talk when you want or don't. Tiffany Rios became a regular almost immediately. She brought sketchbooks with her, filling them with pencil drawings of military boots, curled dogs, and quiet porches. She didn't speak much at first, but her service dog, a golden retriever named Apollo, did the talking with his eyes. Ray McMillan returned too. Shadow padded through the center like he had a badge of his own. Ray didn't say much either, but his presence anchored the space. Veterans who might have otherwise kept to themselves gravitated toward him, because they saw in him what they hoped could be possible in themselves: survival with dignity. Grace organized weekly rhythms, not programs, rhythms. Monday mornings were for what she called silent tables, where veterans could sit with each other without speaking, just to feel not alone.
Wednesday afternoons were walk and talks, short outdoor strolls for those who couldn't sit still long enough for group therapy. Fridays became letters to no one, a private writing hour for words that needed to get out, even if they'd never be sent. She didn't offer advice, she offered space. Some officials doubted her methods. Auditors arrived with checklists and skepticism. One even asked if she had a formal degree in trauma counseling. Grace just pointed to the wall. It was covered now, not with diplomas, but photographs. Men and women smiling in small groups, service dogs curled up at their feet, birthday cakes with uneven frosting, a paper chain made by a 6-year-old whose father now attended every Monday. The space had become more than just a center. It had become a community. And not everyone liked that. One morning, Grace received an official letter. A review of the center's methods had been requested by a congressional subcommittee. Apparently, someone in Washington wanted to know why a non-certified civilian was being allowed to lead a military-backed wellness initiative. The language was sterile. The message was clear. You are under a microscope. Grace folded the letter and placed it in her notebook. She didn't panic. She didn't change. She made more coffee. She greeted more veterans. She let the work speak. The next week, the Mason Herald ran a story titled, "From Café to Command, How Grace Donnelly Rebuilt Trust with Nothing But a Kettle and Compassion." The piece went viral, not because it was flashy, but because it was true. And soon the center began receiving letters from other bases, other towns, other wives, mothers, sons, asking, "Can you teach us what you did?" Grace didn't know how to explain that she hadn't done anything extraordinary. She just never stopped seeing the human behind the uniform. They came unannounced, 3 men and 1 woman, all in plain suits, carrying black leather folders and the kind of expressions that made rooms go quiet. They didn't give their names, just titles. One was from the Department of Defense, another from Veterans Affairs. One said they were with congressional oversight. The woman didn't say anything at all. She just watched. Grace met them in the community room, still wearing her worn flannel and jeans, hands stained faintly from unpacking coffee beans. She offered them seats, poured coffee without asking, and sat across from them with the notebook she always carried.
No microphone, no lawyer, just eye contact. "We're here to assess the validity of your programming," said the man from the DOD, his voice clipped, precise. "We understand you've been running an unsanctioned model of veteran care on federal property." Grace smiled gently. "I call it coffee and consistency." The woman blinked, as if caught off guard. The others did not smile. The VA rep cleared his throat. "You don't hold a license in trauma recovery, nor are you affiliated with any national mental health board." Grace nodded. "Correct. Then what qualifies you to lead a federal wellness center?" There it was, the question. The one they'd been circling, the one people had whispered ever since the Humvees rolled into the Mason Mug parking lot, the one that echoed through bureaucracy, board meetings, and back channels. What qualifies her? Grace didn't answer right away. She stood, walked slowly to the far wall and tapped a photograph, one of dozens. A woman in a military uniform, sleeves rolled, cradling a child in one arm and holding the leash of a German shepherd in the other. This is Lieutenant Kara James. She served 3 tours in Afghanistan. She hasn't stepped foot in a VA facility in 6 years, but she comes here every Tuesday. She pointed to another photo. That's Travis. He doesn't speak, not a word, but he draws. And every time he finishes a sketch, he pins it on that corkboard over there without a sound. And every week, someone else adds one beside it. She turned, voice calm but unmistakably steady. "I don't have a license. I have trust. And in a world where veterans have been failed by systems and silenced by forms, that trust is everything." There was silence. Then the DOD man said, almost reluctantly, "We received a petition last week, over 200 signatures, from active duty personnel, military spouses, local officials, and former patients. It demands the center be expanded, not shut down." The VA rep glanced at the woman, the quiet observer. She gave a small nod. "We're recommending the model be reviewed for national implementation," he said. "But there's a condition." Grace waited. "You'll need to present your philosophy, your model, in person, at the National Veterans Advocacy Summit, Washington, D.C., next month." Grace blinked. "I'm not a speaker," she whispered. "Neither are most of them," said the woman finally. "But someone needs to explain what you've done here, why it works." They stood, folders closed, coffee half drunk. As they left, the woman paused by the corkboard where Travis's sketches hung. She touched the corner of one, an image of a hand holding another against a backdrop of boots and dust. "It's not about credentials," she murmured. "It's about connection." And just like that, they were gone. Later that night, Grace sat alone by the wall of names and photos. The center was quiet, only the soft hum of the heating vents and the distant clink of mugs in the kitchenette. She ran her fingers over the photo of her husband, Michael Donnelly, flannel shirt, smile crooked, eyes full of everything she still missed. "I didn't plan for this, but I think you knew, didn't you?" No answer, just the stillness of a room built from loss, held together by purpose. Outside, Tiffany was walking Apollo around the lot, humming softly. Ray sat on the front bench, shadow beside him, both still and watchful under the stars. And Grace, once just a quiet cafe manager who believed dignity shouldn't require a badge, stood at the edge of something bigger than she ever imagined. She didn't ask for it, but now she couldn't walk away from it either. The ballroom was grand. Crystal chandeliers, military flags, and rows of medals catching the light. But Grace Donnelly stood quietly at the edge, wearing a simple blazer, Michael's old watch, and holding her worn leather notebook. She wasn't there to impress. She was there to speak truth. The MC's words were brief. A woman who reminded us that dignity doesn't need permission. Grace stepped up. No speech, no script, just heart. "I managed a cafe near Fort Granger," she said. "I didn't build a program, I just poured coffee, remembered names, made space." She paused. Ray needed a quiet seat with his dog. Tiffany needed silence without questions. Not every wound bleeds. Not every hero announces themselves. The room fell still. "You asked what qualifies someone to run a wellness center for veterans. I won't quote credentials. I'll quote the sign behind my counter. Be human, be kind, don't look away. That's all." She closed her notebook and looked up. "If you want to build something real, build a place where no one's service is forgotten and no one's pain is ignored." The room erupted. Back in Mason, people watched with tears. Lena clapped. Tiffany held Apollo. Ray saluted the screen. And by nightfall, one phrase had gone viral. Hashtag Grace's House. 3 weeks later, a new wooden sign was mounted at the center. Hand-carved, simple and perfect. "This place began with coffee, but it runs on courage."